Hey there. Welcome to your deep dive on cognitive biases, those fascinating mental quirks that shape how we see the world.
Yeah, it's like having a backstage pass to your own mind.
Exactly.
We're going to uncover how these biases work, why they exist, and how they can sometimes, lead us astray.
Right? Think of it this way. Your brain is like a super efficient machine, constantly processing tons of information to make sense of the world.
Mm.
But sometimes, in its quest for efficiency, it takes shortcuts.
Right, and these shortcuts are called heuristics.
Heuristics.
They're like mental rules of thumb. They help us make quick judgment without getting bogged down in too much detail.
Okay, so let's say you're scrolling through social media and you see a news story about a plane crash. Suddenly, you might feel more anxious about flying, even though statistically flying is still one of the safest ways to travel.
Right, that's the availability heuristic in action.
Availability here is
Because that plane crash is so readily available in your memory, it feels more likely and therefore more frightening.
makes
We often overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled, whether because they're vivid or recent or frequently discussed.
So our brains are playing tricks on us, making us think something is more common or dangerous than it actually is.
Well, it's not intentional trickery, but rather a consequence of how our brains evolved
Yeah.
to prioritize information that seems relevant or important at the time.
Right, but sometimes these mental shortcuts can lead us to make faulty judgments and decisions.
What?
That's where logical fallacies come in.
Precisely, logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that can lead to invalid conclusions.
Oh.
And they can be incredibly persuasive, especially when they tap into our emotions or biases.
I bet our listener has encountered a few of these without even realizing it.
Oh, I'm sure they have one very common fallacy is the argument from authority.
Okay.
It's like saying this new diet must work because a famous celebrity endorsed it.
But just because someone is famous or successful doesn't mean they're an expert on nutrition.
Exactly. It's important to evaluate the evidence and the reasoning behind an argument, rather than simply accepting it because of who said it.
Another one that always gets me is the straw man fallacy.
Oh, the straw man.
It's like when someone misrepresents their opponent's argument to make it easier to attack.
It's a classic debating tactic, unfortunately, like saying if you support gun control, you obviously want to take away everyone's guns and leave us defenseless.
Right. It's such a distortion of the actual argument, and it just shuts down any productive conversation.
It's about creating a caricature of your opponent's position rather than engaging with their actual ideas.
Then there's the ad hominem fallacy, which always feels like a low blow.
Yeah, this one focuses on attacking the person making the argument rather than addressing the argument itself.
So it's like, say, you can't trust anything she says. She's a convicted felon.
Exactly. Even if someone has made mistakes in the past, it doesn't necessarily invalidate their current argument. We need to separate the person from the ideas.
It feels like these fallacies are all around us, especially in the media and online.
They are, and recognizing them is the first step to avoiding being misled by them.
So we need to be critical thinkers, question our assumptions, and be wary of arguments that rely on emotional appeals or personal attacks.
Absolutely. It's about training our minds to recognize these patterns of faulty reasoning.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about how our brains deal with the past. I'm fascinated by the idea of confabulation, how our memories can actually change over time.
It's like our brains are constantly revising and updating the stories we tell ourselves about our past.
It's almost as if we're creating our own personal historical fiction.
In a way, yes, we fill in gaps, smooth over inconsistencies, and even invent details to create a more coherent narrative.
And this can be influenced by all sorts of things: our current beliefs, our emotions, even the information we're exposed to after the event.
Precisely a great example of this is the way people have drawn parallels between the fictional sinking of the Titan in the novel Futility, written 14 years before the Titanic disaster, and the actual event.
Right, I've heard that.
Both ships were considered unsinkable, both had a shortage of lifeboats, and both collided with icebergs in April. It's easy to see the similarities and assume the author had some kind of premonition.
But weren't there also a lot of differences?
There were.
Like the Titan had sails and far fewer people survived in the book. It's like we cherry-pick the details that fit our narrative and ignore the ones that don't.
That's the heart of confabulation, creating a story that makes sense to us, even if it means bending the truth a little.
And this ties into hindsight bias, that I knew it all along feeling.
Exactly. After something happens, it seems so obvious and predictable, even though it might not have seemed that way beforehand.
It's like looking back at old photos of yourself and cringing at your fashion choices, thinking, How could I have ever thought that looked good?
Right, we reinterpret the past through the lens of our current knowledge and experience.
And then there's Nostradamus and his cryptic prophecies. People love to connect his writings to historical events like the rise of Hitler, seeing him as some kind of mystical oracle.
It's tempting to see those connections, but when you actually analyze his writings, most of them are incredibly vague and open to interpretation.
Right.
People tend to focus on the predictions that seem to have come true and ignore the hundreds that didn't.
Right. It's like throwing darts at a wall and then drawing a bullseye around the ones that hit closest to the center.
It's called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
And it highlights our tendency to find patterns and meaning after the fact, even when they don't really exist.
So how do these biases affect our ability to learn from the past?
Well, if we constantly reinterpret history to fit our current understanding, we might miss important lessons.
Okay.
We might oversimplify events, misattribute causes, and fail to see the complexities that led to certain outcomes.
It's like we're telling ourselves a simplified story about the past, rather than grappling with the messy, unpredictable reality.
And this can have real-world consequences. For example, the belief that vaccines cause autism has persisted despite overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary. This misconception likely arose because some autism symptoms appear around the same time that children are vaccinated.
So it's correlation, not causation.
Exactly. But ignoring all the other factors at play and the millions of children who are vaccinated without developing autism is like focusing on the fact that the Titanic hit an iceberg while ignoring the fact that it was traveling at high speed in a known iceberg field.
Right. We tend to latch onto correlations that fit our existing beliefs and ignore evidence that contradicts them.
Exactly.
So being aware of these biases is crucial for being a critical thinker and understanding the world around us.
It's about recognizing the limitations of our own minds and being open to different perspectives.
Now, moving from our individual brains to how we behave in groups, we've all experienced that feeling of going with the flow, even when we know it might not be the best choice.
That's conformity, the pressure to fit in with the group. It's a powerful force that can influence our behavior in all sorts of ways.
Like that famous Ash conformity experiment where people were asked to judge the length of lines and they conformed to the group's obviously wrong answers, even though they knew it was wrong.
It's a classic demonstration of how social pressure can override our own perceptions and judgments.
And when groups come together to make decisions, things can get even trickier.
Right, we get what's called groupthink, where everyone wants to maintain harmony, so doubts and dissenting opinions get silenced.
Yeah.
It can lead to some disastrous choices, like the Challenger space shuttle disaster, where engineers' concerns about the safety of the O-rings were overridden due to pressure to launch on schedule.
Yeah, it's scary how easily that can happen. And then there's social loafing, that feeling of someone else will take care of it, leading you to put in less effort when working in a group.
It's a classic example of diffusion of responsibility.
Diffusion of responsibility.
We feel less accountable for the outcome when our individual contribution is less visible.
Like in the public goods game, where people contribute money to a common pot. But some people contribute less because they figure others will pick up the slack.
Exactly. And this can happen in any group setting, from work teams to community organizations.
Yeah.
It's important to create structures that promote individual accountability, even within a team context.
So how can we overcome these social biases?
Well, first, we need to be aware of them. Recognizing the influence of conformity and social loafing is the first step to counteracting them.
And fostering an environment where everyone feels safe to speak up and share their opinions, even if they go against the grain.
Precisely, encourage critical thinking, respectful debate, and open communication. That's how you avoid the pitfalls of groupthink and harness the true power of collaboration.
This has been fascinating. We've covered a lot of ground, from how our brains take shortcuts to how social pressure can sway our decisions. But we've only just scratched the surface. Let's take a quick pause, and when we come back, we'll delve into some of the biases that affect our self-perception and our relationships with others.
Welcome back now. Let's turn the spotlight onto ourselves and how these biases shape the stories we tell about who we are.
Yeah, I think we've all had that moment where we've done something embarrassing in public, like tripping and falling or spilling a drink on ourselves, and we feel like everyone is staring and judging us. It's what psychologists call the spotlight effect.
And research shows it's mostly in our heads.
Really?
We tend to overestimate how much attention others are paying to us. They're usually too preoccupied with their own lives and concerns to notice our every fumble.
So that time I completely blanked on my coworker's name during introductions. They probably didn't even register it as much as I did.
Most likely, our brains tend to magnify our own actions and appearance, making them seem more salient than they actually are to others.
That's a relief to know that our blunders don't always make as big of a splash as we imagine.
And this ties into another interesting bias, the illusion of transparency. We often assume that our internal states are more visible to others than they actually are, like our emotions, our thoughts, our anxieties.
Oh, so when I'm giving a presentation and I feel like my nervousness is radiating out of me, the audience probably isn't picking up on it as much as I think.
Probably not, unless you're outwardly displaying signs of nervousness, like sweating or trembling. Your audience is likely more focused on the content of your presentation than on your internal state.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I'll definitely be keeping that in mind next time I'm in front of a crowd.
Now, on the flip side, we also make assumptions about other people's thoughts and feelings, and sometimes those assumptions can be way off base.
You're talking about the fundamental attribution error.
Exactly. It's our tendency to overemphasize dispositional factors when explaining their behavior while underestimating the role of situational factors.
Okay, so let's say I'm waiting in line at the grocery store and the person in front of me is taking forever to count out their change. I might get impatient and think this person is so inconsiderate and slow.
But what if they're just having a really tough day, or they're struggling with a learning disability that makes it difficult for them to handle money? We often jump to conclusions about people's character without considering the context of their actions.
So the key is to be more aware of the situational factors that might be influencing someone's behavior and to give people the benefit of the doubt.
That's a great takeaway. It's a reminder that we're all complex individuals navigating a complex world, and understanding the power of situational factors is key to having more empathy and compassion for others.
Speaking of complexity, let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, self-serving bias. This is where we take credit for success but blame failure on external factors.
Precisely, it's a way of protecting our egos and maintaining a positive self-image.
So if I ace a presentation at work, I'm likely to attribute it to my hard work and preparation, but if it bombs, I might blame it on a faulty projector or a distracting audience.
Exactly. It's like we have this built-in defense mechanism that helps us maintain a belief in our own competence, even in the face of setbacks.
But doesn't this prevent us from learning from our mistakes?
It can. If we're not careful, it's important to be able to acknowledge our own shortcomings and take responsibility for our actions, even when it's uncomfortable.
And this ties into another bias we talked about, illusory superiority. It's that tendency to believe we're better than average at almost everything.
Which, statistically speaking, can't be true for everyone.
Right. But it seems like most of us have this slightly inflated view of our abilities.
It's like we all have these rose-colored glasses on when it comes to judging ourselves, as we tend to focus on our strengths and downplay our weaknesses.
So if I asked our listeners right now to rate their driving skills, I bet most of them would say they're above average.
Most likely. And this bias extends to all sorts of areas: intelligence, morality, attractiveness, even how long we think we'll live.
It's almost like a self-preservation mechanism, helping us stay optimistic and motivated.
There is definitely an evolutionary advantage to having a positive self-image. It can boost our confidence and make us more likely to take risks and pursue our goals.
But it can also make us resistant to feedback and blind to our own areas for improvement.
That's right. It's important to find a balance between self-acceptance and self-improvement. Being aware of our self-serving bias can help us be more open to feedback and more willing to acknowledge areas where we can grow.
Now, how about we delve into those fascinating instances when people actively try to sabotage their own success to protect their egos? It almost sounds counterintuitive, right?
You're talking about self-handicapping, and you're right, it does seem paradoxical.
It's like setting yourself up to fail so you have a ready-made excuse.
Exactly. Let's say you have a big presentation coming up. If you're worried about failing, you might stay up all night partying or procrastinate until the last minute. Then if the presentation goes poorly, you can blame your lack of preparation instead of your lack of ability.
I've definitely pulled that one a few times. It's like creating a safety net for your ego.
And while it might provide temporary relief from anxiety, it ultimately prevents us from reaching our full potential. It's important to recognize when we're engaging in self-handicapping behaviors and challenge those patterns.
I can see how this ties into another concept we talked about earlier, the just world fallacy. If we believe the world is fair and that people get what they deserve, then failure must be a reflection of some personal flaw.
That's right. The just world fallacy can make it even harder to accept failure because we see it as a sign that we've done something wrong. This can lead to a vicious cycle of self-blame and self-sabotage.
So maybe the key is to accept that failure is a part of life, that it doesn't define us as individuals, and that it can actually be a valuable learning experience.
Absolutely, failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of the process.
Now, what about the influence of our physical sensations on our thoughts and feelings? I find the concept of embodied cognition fascinating.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of mind and body. Embodied cognition suggests that our physical sensations can actually influence our perceptions and judgments.
So our bodies aren't just vessels for our minds. They're
Yeah.
actively shaping how we think and feel.
Exactly. For example, studies have shown that people who hold a warm cup of coffee perceive strangers they interact with as more generous and caring than those who hold a cup of iced coffee.
So the warmth of the coffee literally translates into a feeling of warmth towards another person.
It seems that way the physical sensation of warmth primed the participants to interpret social interactions in a more positive light.
And I've read about similar studies where holding a heavy clipboard made people perceive job candidates as more serious and qualified.
Exactly. The weight of the clipboard subconsciously influenced their judgments. It's a reminder that our physical experiences are constantly shaping our perceptions, even in subtle ways.
That's incredible. It makes you wonder how many other unconscious influences are shaping our thoughts and behaviors.
That's the exciting thing about studying cognitive biases. It's a constantly evolving field that reveals the hidden workings of our minds.
So moving on to the topic of decision-making. I'm always amazed by how easily we can be swayed by seemingly irrelevant information.
It speaks to the power of the anchoring effect. Our first impressions and initial exposures to information have a lasting impact on our judgments and choices, even if we know that information is unreliable or irrelevant.
So it's like our minds latch onto that first piece of information as a reference point, and then all subsequent judgments are made in relation to that anchor.
Precisely. It's why retailers use original prices to make sale prices seem more appealing, even if those original prices were artificially inflated.
I know I've fallen for that one before. It's like they're setting an anchor in my mind, and even though I know it's a marketing tactic, I still find myself comparing the sale price to that inflated original price.
And it's not just about prices. The anchoring effect can influence all sorts of judgments, from estimating the population of a country to evaluating the qualifications of a job candidate.
So if someone asks me to guess how many jelly beans are in a jar, and they start by suggesting a ridiculously high number, I'm likely to guess higher than I would if they hadn't given me that initial anchor.
Exactly. That initial anchor sets the range of possible answers in your mind, even if you consciously know it's irrelevant.
It's incredible how much our subconscious minds are influencing our decisions without us even realizing it.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not always as rational and objective as we think we are.
So we need to be mindful of the information we're exposed to and question our assumptions.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is our best defense against the anchoring effect and other cognitive biases that can lead us astray.
Now let's talk about how we pay attention, or rather, how we fail to pay attention. I think everyone has had the experience of being so focused on one thing that they completely miss something else that's right in front of them.
It's a classic example of inattentional blindness.
Inattentional blindness.
Our attention is a limited resource, and when we're focused on a specific task, we often fail to notice unexpected or irrelevant information, even if it's quite obvious.
Like that famous experiment where people were asked to count how many times a basketball was passed between players, and they completely missed a gorilla walking through the scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were so focused on counting passes that they failed to see the unexpected gorilla. And it's not just about visual information we can experience, inattentional deafness as well.
Oh, I know that one. When I'm engrossed in a book, I often don't hear my partner talking to me.
That's it. Or when you're listening to music and don't hear your phone ringing, it highlights how selective our attention is and how easily we can miss things that aren't within our focus of attention.
And it makes you wonder how much we miss in everyday life just because we're not paying attention.
It's a good reminder to be more mindful and present in the moment, to open our senses to the full richness of our experience.
Absolutely. And to appreciate the unexpected, like gorillas walking through basketball games.
Speaking of unexpected, we have to address one of the most intriguing quirks of human psychology, the illusion of control. We tend to believe we have more control over events than we actually do.
It's like that feeling of being lucky or that we can somehow influence the outcome of a random event, like rolling dice or winning the lottery.
Exactly. Studies have shown that people are more likely to bet on a lottery ticket they chose themselves than on one that was randomly assigned to them, even though the odds of winning are exactly the same.
So it's like we imbue the ticket with some kind of magical power just because we had a hand in selecting it.
In a way, yes, we overestimate the impact of our actions on random events. This is also why people tend to throw dice harder when they want a higher number and softer when they want a lower number.
It's as if we believe our intention can somehow influence the laws of physics, And it's not just about gambling. The illusion of control can manifest in all areas of life, right?
Absolutely. People who feel more powerful or in control are more likely to overestimate their ability to predict the future and to influence events.
So maybe a little humility is in order recognizing the limits of our control can help us manage our expectations and avoid disappointment.
And it can help us be more accepting of uncertainty and the unpredictable nature of life.
Well, after exploring all these ways our brains can trick us, I'm starting to feel a little less confident in my own judgment.
Don't worry, that's actually a good sign. Recognizing our cognitive biases is the first step to overcoming their influence.
So it's like shining a light on these mental shadows and bringing them into our conscious awareness.
Exactly. It's about understanding the limitations of our thinking so we can make more informed decisions and navigate the world with a clearer perspective.
This deep dive has been incredibly enlightening, but we still have more mental terrain to cover. Let's take another quick pause and return for our final exploration of these fascinating quirks of human perception. Welcome back to our deep dive into cognitive biases. We've uncovered how our brains take shortcuts and how social pressure can sway our decisions. But there's still more to explore.
Let's start with a bias that can really trip us up when it comes to making judgments about people and events. The representativeness heuristic.
Representativeness heuristic. Okay, give us an example. I'm sure our listener can relate to this one.
Imagine you're at a party and you meet someone who's dressed very formally, carrying a briefcase, and talking about their recent trip to a financial conference. If you had to guess, would you say they're more likely to be a lawyer or a librarian?
Based on that description, I probably guess lawyer, they fit the stereotype, right?
Exactly. That's the representativeness heuristic at work. We tend to judge the probability of something based on how well it matches our existing mental models or stereotypes.
But that can be misleading, can it? There are
Yeah.
plenty of librarians who attend conferences and dress professionally.
Precisely. We often overlook base rates, the statistical probabilities, when we have vivid descriptions or stereotypes that we can latch onto.
So in our example, even if there were way more librarians at the party than lawyers, we might still assume the person is a lawyer based on their appearance and behavior.
That's the danger of the representativeness heuristic. It can lead us to make snap judgments that aren't based on sound reasoning.
So it's like our intuition overrides our logical reasoning.
Often, yes, and this can have real-world consequences. For example, imagine you're a hiring manager and you're interviewing two candidates for a job. One candidate fits the stereotype of a successful entrepreneur. They're charismatic, confident, and have a lot of bold ideas. The other candidate is more reserved and analytical, but they have a proven track record of success.
I can see how the representativeness heuristic might lead the hiring manager to favor the first candidate, even if the second candidate is actually a better fit for the job.
Exactly. It's important to be aware of these biases and to make sure we're evaluating people based on their actual qualifications and experience, not just on how well they fit our preconceived notions.
Now, what about the role of expectations in shaping our experiences? I think we've all had times when our expectations, whether positive or negative, have colored our perceptions.
That's the power of expectation bias. Our preconceived notions about how things should be can actually influence how we perceive them.
Like when you go to a restaurant that everyone's been raving about, and then you're slightly disappointed because the food wasn't as amazing as you expected.
Exactly. Or the opposite when you try a new dish with low expectations and end up being pleasantly surprised.
And this bias isn't limited to food. It can affect our perceptions of people, places, products, even our own performance.
Absolutely. Think about the placebo effect. When people believe they're receiving a treatment that will improve their condition, they often experience real improvements even if the treatment is actually inert.
So it's like our beliefs are shaping our physical reality.
In a way, yes, our expectations have the power to influence our perceptions, our behaviors, and even our physiological responses.
So if we expect a certain outcome, we might unconsciously bias our perceptions to confirm those expectations.
That's right. And this can be helpful in some cases. For example, if you believe you're going to ace a presentation, that confidence might actually help you perform better.
Right. But it can also lead us to ignore evidence that contradicts our expectations.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to be aware of this bias and to try to approach situations with an open mind, being willing to adjust our expectations based on the evidence.
Now, before we wrap up, I have to ask about one of my favorite biases, the curse of knowledge.
Ah, yes. The curse of knowledge is something we all struggle with, especially as we become more knowledgeable in a particular area.
It's that tendency to assume that other people know what we know, even when they have no way of knowing.
Exactly. When we're experts in something, we often forget what it was like to be a novice. We take our knowledge for granted.
I experience this all the time when I'm trying to explain something technical to my parents. I find myself using jargon and making assumptions about their understanding that just leaves them confused.
It's a classic example of the curse of knowledge. We need to remember to break things down into simpler terms, avoiding jargon, and providing context.
So it's like we need to step outside our own heads and try to see things from the perspective of someone who doesn't have our level of expertise.
Precisely, it takes effort and empathy to communicate effectively with people who have different levels of understanding.
Well, I think this entire deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. We've explored a wide range of cognitive biases that can influence our perceptions, our memories, our judgments, and our behaviors.
From heuristics and logical fallacies to the power of social influence and the quirks of self-perception, we've seen how these mental shortcuts can both help and hinder us in our daily lives.
It's like we've been given a superpower, the ability to spot these mental traps and navigate the world with a clearer perspective.
Exactly. And it's a journey of continuous learning and self-discovery. The more we understand about how our minds work, the better equipped we are to live more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
That's a great note to end on. So to our listener, keep those brains questioning and those perceptions sharp until next time.